All right. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll get underway here. So, yeah, thanks for joining for this webinar, Visualizing Progress Toward a Goal in Tableau. Hopefully the audio sounds good. Hopefully the video feed's coming through. If you got any issues in the meantime, feel free to let me know. Got my colleague Kirk on the line as my second set of eyes in case, in case I missed something like the last webinar where I think I had my screen paused for the first 3 minutes. So we're grateful you're here. I apologize if there's any howling in the background. My wife and I have a 6-month-old Labrador Retriever puppy, and he's been getting spoiled a lot lately by getting to be out of his crate, but he's really annoyed when he gets put in there. So that's going on over here. I'm going to try and stay concentrated and focused in the meantime. So to our topic for the day, we're going to be focusing on a number of different charts and visualization types that you can use to demonstrate progress toward a goal in a Tableau dashboard. Before we dive into some more of the technical content, though, I'll do a little introduction. I know a lot of you already, maybe from Tableau classes or interacting on blogs or social feeds. So appreciate getting to see so many folks I know. And then also it's just fun to have more new people as well. So if you were inviting your colleagues, we always appreciate that as well. So my name's Eric. I'll be doing the lion's share of the presenting today. I live in the Seattle area. I've been working closely with Tableau and a couple other organizations for 7 years now. Spend my time split between teaching classes. Sometimes that's actually teaching official Tableau classes. Sometimes that's building custom trainings and delivering those for clients. Also work on a number of different Tableau projects. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth and learn things, is either students asking me questions and I have to figure out an answer, or working with a client and they ask for something that they've seen before and we figure out how to do that. So it's been fun. It's a great way to learn. And, they always say one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So I appreciate having the forum of the blog to be able to write about this kind of content on a weekly basis. So I know a lot of you have seen that already. I'll make sure that I send a link out to that in the follow-up. And then we try and do these webinars, monthly, quarterly, however often kind of is realistic based on whatever else is going on. So we definitely want your interactivity and feedback throughout the webinar. So I think what I'm mainly going to do is answer questions at the end. Just makes it a little bit easier and helps me keep my train of thought rolling. So do feel free to use the questions or the chat dialogue. Kirk's going to kind of help me monitor that, and he might be able to type you a response. And I'll make sure we carve out a little bit of time at the end, or if I need to, I'll stay late so that we can make sure that, we address any questions that come up. So I will also be recording this. So, if you have to cut out early or something, or you end up wanting to share this with a colleague, I'll have a recording out by the end of the week so that you're able to do that. Okay, so I've been thinking about this webinar for a while, and just kind of finally was able to kind of put together all the building blocks over the last couple months here. And I've been thinking about what are some of the different visuals that I use to demonstrate progress toward a goal. And so I've written a handful down here. We're going to spend some time diving into each one in a little bit more detail. This probably is not an exhaustive list. There certainly are others, but I would say that these are sort of the main 5, I guess you could say, that I use for that. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one, which is kind of a classic, right? Using a bar versus a reference line. So what I really like about this, and what I think is one of the greatest strengths of this visual type, is it's very familiar to people, right? A lot of people have seen something like this before. You're utilizing some of Tableau's greatest strengths to encode quantitative data, just meaning that we're really good at like telling how long one bar is relative to another, or how close it was to a line for a goal. You can incorporate color to indicate whether a goal was met or not. So that's some of the great parts about this. The situations where I might be less likely to use something like this would be if I have a ton of values, right? If you have 50 values, you can't very easily fit 50 bars on a single screen. So that's one spot where it might not work as well. Doesn't look great for just 1 or 2 values. There is kind of a sweet spot of maybe 3, 5, 10 values. And it's actually not really great for a wide range of values. And you can actually even just see that in this screenshot that I have here. So you can see that top bar, phones, the sales amount of phones in the Superstore data set is way more than the bottom bar fasteners. It's actually so much so that you can't even really tell how far the fasteners bar missed the goal by. So that is kind of one of the weaknesses of this, is just if you have a range of goals, it could be a little bit more difficult to tell how far off some of those smaller values are. So what I'm going to do, I'll just kind of quickly build out something comparable to this in Tableau Desktop. And then I'll just pause for a second after that, and then we'll dive into the next one. So I've got a few calculations pre-built just to save us a little time. So the main things that we're going to be using, and you could probably just watch this following along, is going to be difficult. Maybe if you want to do that with the recording later this week, that might work. We're just going to primarily be using these three fields here. So 2020 sales, 2020 sales goal, and subcategory. So I'm just going to start by getting a row for each categories by putting that on the row shelf. And I'm going to get my 2020 sales measure, drop that on columns, and then just do a descending sort. So at this point, just a classic bar chart. Now, if I want to take another field, right, so in this case, 2020 sales goal, and I want that to be a reference line, I do need this field, 2020 sales goal, to be in my worksheet. And what I mean by in my worksheet is it's got to be in columns or rows or somewhere in the marks card. Because if I just go to my 2020 sales axis right now and try and add a reference line, I cannot pick 2020 sales goal from that dropdown just because it's not active here yet. So you don't have to do anything special with it. You can just drop it in your marks card, maybe put it on tooltip. As long as it is actively being used somewhere, then what you can do when you go to add that reference line is to pick that value from the dropdown. So that's kind of a gotcha. I know a lot of you have probably seen me do that before, but I know that really threw me off when early in using Tableau. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. They kind of throw a bunch of labels on there and make it look a little crazy. So now I've got something like this, right? So then the last step to match what we saw in the slides is just using color to indicate if a value did or did not meet a goal. So I'll just quickly create a new calculated field for that. I'll just say met sales goal. And then one of the things I like to do here is to actually use the fields after they've been pulled into the worksheet as opposed to the data pane. The nice part about that is if I just grab some of 2020 sales off of columns, it actually grabs the aggregation with the measure as well, which is nice just so I don't have to retype that or have to double check. I just know that I'm referencing the fields exactly the way that they're being used in this worksheet. So I'll go ahead and throw that met sales goal on color. Just do a quick edit here. Right. And then great, we got something where we've got a bar versus reference line, we're using color, but again, it's kind of hard to see these fasteners values or even the envelopes values a little bit difficult. So we'll actually look at a solution for that here in just a moment. All right, so that's probably my most used of these different visual types, but again, it does have a few weaknesses. So carrying on from there, sort of the second option, which has some trade-offs, would be using custom flags or bullet points to indicate when a value is above or below a goal. So you can see in this case, this is more of a text table kind of format. It's great for viewing specific values, meaning that if you want to see dollars and cents figures, you can do that. Or, comparing that to that bar versus reference line thing, when you have a wide range of values, this is actually probably going to work a little bit better. The downsides of this, I would just say is, if every single one of these values had a red dot next to it, wouldn't be that valuable because it'd just be a lot of color. And it does take a little bit of extra effort to be able to sort or filter on which values did or did not meet their goals. So I'll just take another few minutes here to dive into this one, share a couple thoughts about the ways that I like to do things, how you create that little column there with the circle or a flag. So we'll go ahead and flip back over to Tableau Desktop for that. So I'm actually going to do something similar to what I had in that last worksheet. I'll start with subcategory on rows. But this time, instead of creating bars, I'm going to create a text table with columns. So I'll put 2020 sales on text. My favorite way of getting another column of text is just to double click on the next measure you want. So double click on 2020 sales goal. That's out here now. I'll sort on the sales column. And now let's say I just want to add a flag next to the subcategory column that just flags if a value did not meet its goal. Okay. So I'll create a new calculated field. And I'll just call this missed goal. So what this would do is I'm going to say if my sales is less than my goal, I'm just going to, just as a placeholder here for a moment, I'm just going to type the word flag. And then I'll just say else, back-to-back quotes for a blank. And so one cool trick I learned here a long time ago from a Tableau mentor of mine is that you can actually insert a kind of a custom icon here. And I don't mean like a JPEG or a PNG, but if you've heard of ASCII characters before, you can actually use those here. So to show you what I mean, so watch this. If I type in flag ASCII, let's just go with that, flag ASCII symbol, you can see there's a number of different symbols here. They're basically little text symbols. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the one that looks like a flag. And I'll paste that here where the word flag is currently written. Okay. And then the cool part about this is you can see it's a discrete field. So I can just put this next to subcategory on rows. And now a flag shows up when a value missed its goal. So highlighting tables, focusing on that, it was 60,000 out of 66,000, so that was a little bit off. And then if you want it to be a specific color or centered or bigger, anything like that, you can just do that all through formatting because this is technically a text object. So I'm just going to right click on the flag, select format. I'll center it. The size is fine. I don't think I'd want it any bigger than that. And then I'll just go ahead and make those flags red. So that's kind of a fun addition. Like you can see, it's actually not that much work, but it just takes a little bit of creativity. So then a couple other thoughts here, things you might want to consider if you are going more of a text table route for something like this. So first of all, let's say I just want to filter on those values which missed their goal. Technically, I could use the missed goal calculation for that, but then my end user would just be choosing between the options of a blank or a flag, which isn't super ideal. So I'm actually just going to duplicate my missed goal field and edit it, and I'll just call this my missed goal filter. And so I'll say, if it's less than the goal, then missed goal, else met goal. Right, so providing text values like that, it's a little bit more clear for my end user, might be nice. So for now, I'll just say keep all of those. I'll show this filter. And then if I just want to, let's say this is a lot bigger list, this is less than 20 values, but if this was 100 values, your end user might want to focus on just those that missed. So they could select that and just kind of zero in there. One other nice thing about the text table route is just, if you want to add more columns or there's more supporting information which might be helpful, then you could do that. So for instance, I might say missed goal amount. So basically, if you missed a goal, how much did you miss it by? So I will say if my sales is, or actually let me think about this for a second. Let me do it this way. The missed goal amount would just be the goal minus the sales amount. But if you exceed your goal by $10,000, I don't want it saying your missed amount was negative 10,000. That would be kind of weird. So I'll say if this is less than 0, then just give me the number 0. Otherwise, give me this difference. Okay. Just do a quick number format on that so it looks halfway decent. put that out there as another column. And then that's actually almost another flag, another way to be able to tell, oh, hey, I missed the goal and it was by this many dollars, for instance. All right, so there you go. That's kind of two different styles, different methods for being able to compare a value to a goal. So I would say those first two probably make up like close to 2/3, maybe 70% of the different visuals that I will utilize toward visualizing progress toward a goal. But yeah, we'll go ahead and look at some others now. And this next one I would say is still one of my primaries, and then we'll get into kind of some more niche cases from there. So the highlight table, the reason I use something like this is when I have a lot of values, right? So we're not talking about 5, 10, 20. We're talking about 50 or 100 values where you need to be able to quickly say, yes, this was above, or, no, this wasn't below this threshold. So you can see this highlight table here, which we'll do a recreation together of. This is like 50 values. You can use a few different colors to indicate, different thresholds that were met. I would say the weaknesses of this is it is a lot of information. So you can see in this screenshot, I've only just provided the labels for the red squares, just because if you have labels on every square, it's a little bit too much. So yeah, that's just something to take into account with this. So let me go ahead and flip over. We'll create a highlight table here, talk about some of the little tricks that you can use to get the most out of that. So again, I think similar data, not getting too creative with that. We only have 30 minutes, so, got to do what we can here. Okay, so I have my subcategory and I have my segments. I'll just make this a text field for now. And I think in that example, I was using profit ratio. So I was saying like, hey, if your profit ratio is above 25%, you met your goal. If it was above 10%, you did all right. And then if it was below 10%, that's not very good, according to us. So let me go ahead and find this pre-calculated profit ratio here. And for those, if you're watching the recording or wanting to kind of recreate some of this using Superstore data, this is just sum of profit divided by sum of sales. So I'm just going to put profit ratio on text here for now. And you can see that if you just scan some of those columns, you can see that the high end seems to be maybe in the 40% range, and I'm actually even seeing some negative profit ratios kind of on the lower end. So I'll create a calculated field here now just to break this into a few different tiers. So, I'm not going to be too specific here because it's just more for an example. So I'll say if profit ratio is greater than or equal to 0.25 or 25%, then great. Else if profit ratio is greater than or equal to 10%, then okay. And then I'll just say, else if profit ratio is less than 10%, then needs improvement. Okay, so it says valid. We should, ideally have 3 colors here when all is said and done. So go ahead and hit OK. And I'm going to take that new calculation, profit ratio tiers, and I'll put that on color in the marks card to start. Now, since our marks since our mark type is set to text right now, it's actually just going to change the color of the text, which, if you're good with that, then that's fine. That's not my favorite way of doing things. I find that depending on the color, sometimes they become really difficult to read. So just to give you an idea of what I mean by that, like if I was using yellow as a color here, those, at least for me, maybe I just have bad eyesight, but reading those yellow values is difficult. So that's where something like a highlight table is nice. You're influencing the background color behind the text rather than the text color itself. So I guess I'll be asking a little bit of a rhetorical question here because there's not a great way short of unmuting you all to get feedback. But or actually, I guess there's the little raise your hand thing in the attendee pane, so you could try and use that. Has anybody come across this situation before where you're using a field like this on color and you want to use it in a highlight table? So you change your mark type to square, but then instead of kind of the nice like, hey, the squares fit in neatly when you use a measure, um, they just end up with like little squares like this, and size doesn't really help. I mean, they end up just bleeding into each other. So yeah, so I'm seeing some hands there. So maybe I'm not the only one. At least Daniel and I have come across this. So there's actually a little trick you can use if you ever come across this, wanting to use a discrete field on color in a highlight table. I learned this in, I think, like the Tableau Visual Analytics class several years back. So what you actually do is you change your mark type to a bar chart, which seems weird, right? And right now I don't have any values on size or on rows, so there pretty much are no bars. They're just little slivers there. And then what I'm going to do, if you're using an older version of Tableau, you can use the number of records field. I think mine is too new, so I'm just going to create a calculated field called 1, which is just the number 1. And I'm just going to use this as a placeholder to give the bars some size. So what I mean by that is I'm going to take 1, and I'm going to drop this on size in the marks card, which, actually, that turned out pretty well. So anyways, I think depending on your data set, you might need to do like the minimum or the maximum value of that one field. But yeah, now you can see it looks like a normal looking highlight table. So again, the trick was just change the mark type to bar and then put like a number of records or some duplicate type field like that on size. Then you could end up with something like this. I think I did influence the size of the slider. They might be sort of weird and skinny if not. So just maxing out the widths of the bars there. And then I showed in the screenshot in the slides, I showed that only the red labels were showing up. So two different possible ways of getting there. One, it can just be done all through the label section of the marks card, meaning that if I go into label, I could just say show all mark labels, but only when they're highlighted. Okay, so what that means is that if somebody clicks on an individual square, the label shows up. Or if they click on a header, all those labels show up. Or even just if they click on a value in the highlight table, all those labels show up. So that's one nice way of not having an overwhelming amount of labels and just giving the end user the ability to have them show. But if you know ahead of time, like I want specific labels to show up, another option would just be to create a calculated field that will only show labels like under a specific threshold. So I'll just call this like low profit ratios. And I'll just say this, if profit ratio is less than 10%, then profit ratio. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the original profit ratio just to tooltip, and I'll move low profit ratios to label. I think actually I do need to format those so that they're percentages. Right, so then those are only showing up on the red squares because it matches the criteria that we used for the colors. However, since I moved the actual profit ratio to tooltip, those values are still going to show up when you hover over those squares. These tooltips are a little ugly. In a different webinar someday, maybe we'll talk about options for cleaning up tooltips. So cool. So again, that's highlight tables, and those are great for, in this case, this is like 50 values. All right. So we're going to look at two more visual types, probably a little less depth on these just based on the amount of time we have left and the fact that these are a bit more complex to put together. So one that I do like to use in some select circumstances to add some kind of visual flair to dashboards is filling in a custom image. So if you've seen like on Kickstarter or GoFundMe, some of those types of websites have like thermometers that fill in as value gets closer and closer to a goal, this is actually a way you can do that. So I think I actually saw somebody at the Iron Viz competition at Tableau conference. Must have been like 6 years ago. I saw somebody do this and I thought it was cool and relatively simple as well. So I'm just going to kind of show you more so the finished version of this and just a couple things that you can do to get you there. So this is a dashboard that has a custom shape that's being filled in, showing that like, hey, we're fundraising toward building a school, and it's 71%. We're at 71% of our goal. So the dark blue bar is how much of the actual value we have, versus the light blue portion is that's more so like, oh, what's still left. So it's actually kind of simple. All that I have going on here is this is just a bar chart in the background. I just made it as wide as possible by increasing size. And then this is just a PNG file that's the shape of a school that's just transparent in the middle. And then I've just hovered this over the bar so that, as that value increases or decreases, then the school fills in more and more. So just maybe a kind of a quick tip about like, hey, how do I create something like this, right? Because when I first started doing this, I had to like email a colleague like, I don't have Photoshop. Can you take this image and make it transparent for me? And he'd be like, yeah, but like I have a real job, so come on. So eventually, I found something called LunaPic, which is just like a free online image editor. So just to show you, I'll send a link to this when I'm sending out the recording. So with LunaPic, it's free, like I said, and all you got to do is just choose a file. So like I'm going to pick one that I just already put on my desktop here. And all that this file is it's just a white background with a dark school shape in the middle. Okay. And then to make it transparent, because I already had the little transparent tool loaded, all I got to do is just click on the color that I want to become transparent. And then it just makes it transparent. How about that? So then all I got to do from there is just save the image, ideally as a PNG file type, because that allows for transparency, and then bring that image into my dashboard. I would say that I definitely have the best success with an image like this that's just one solid block for the icon, as opposed to like, oh, well, there's a separate bell that's hanging off a different wing of the school. And when it's multiple shapes, this free tool doesn't work as well. But again, if you have something more sophisticated like Photoshop, more power to you. So if you're reading the blog, I actually did a blog post about this last week. So I'll make sure I link that so that if you want to kind of go into every step that's required to create something like this, then you can. Okay. And last one that we'll touch on, and again, we'll just kind of touch on this one at a high level. If you want to use a donut chart with sort of a reference line demonstrating where a goal would be, you could do that as well. So this is similar to like a gauge, if you've ever seen gauge charts. So what I like about this, it's fun, it's different, spices things up a little bit. You could pack a few of these side by side. It is kind of difficult to create. It's probably not meant for all audiences. Maybe somebody who's a little bit more advanced. And that last bullet point there, needs a set endpoint. This works best in a situation where like, oh, our maximum value is 100% or $100,000 or like some defined endpoint, as opposed to being able to go over 100%. So again, just at like a really high level, if you haven't created a donut chart before, it's basically just a circle on top of a pie chart, and then using dual axis to sort of trick them to go in together. And then for this donut, it's just 5 calculations that you put together, or sorry, the pie chart is just 5 calculations. And I'll provide a blog post for this as well. But the 5 calculations would be value up to the goal amount, value up to the goal amount if the goal amount was short of the goal, the actual goal itself, the extended value if it went past the goal, and the remainder. So all 5 of those have been put together as different slices here to indicate like how close or far off of a goal that this donut chart was. So then you can see like, hey, you met 77% of your goal, you fell this much short. Okay. And since these are all individual values, if I'd prefer not to use yellow to indicate where I fell short because I feel like, oh, it makes it feel like that's filled in, that's totally up to me, right? I could say, yeah, actually, I want that to be white so that I could sort of see where that fell short. So then I could easily see, like, okay, this one went past the goal amount, but like this one fell short. So, like I said, I'll do a blog post or I'll send a blog post follow up on that because we've hit the time threshold, and I want to respect that. So I'm happy to stick around a little bit later too, if anybody wants to specifically talk about that. But these 30 minutes always go too fast. So thanks again for joining for this. I will send out follow-up resources Thursday, Friday, somewhere in there. My recommendation to you would be to just take one of these things that we talked about and find somewhere to apply it in your own workplace. That's always a great way to learn and to solidify what we've done, as opposed to just seeing something interesting, walk away, never really put it into action. And yeah, let us know if you have questions. So I am going to stick around for questions for those that have to drop, or maybe those that are watching a recording. That's my email right there, eric.parker@onenumber.biz. And if you ever have questions, if you have an idea for a blog post or a webinar, or you actually want specifically help on something you're working on, we could do that. We do office hours. You could sign up as little as 1 hour of help at a time. We do consulting for larger projects if you want to bring us in for a day or a week or a month. And then we actually build and deliver custom training as well. So if you like what you see here and you're like, hey, we have 5 things we want to learn about as a team, could you put something together? Yeah, we can absolutely do that. So I have seen some questions roll in. I'll go ahead and address the ones that are in the queue first, and then feel free to keep typing those into the questions dialogue as I go, and I'll work my way down. But if you do have to drop, thanks again for being here. I do appreciate it. It's fun to be able to interact with all of you, and love seeing your names. Hope you're all doing well, and we'll look forward to catching you with future blog posts and webinars and trainings and all that we do over here. Great. So I'm just going to work my way back to the top of the questions. I know some of these are like 15 minutes old, but it is what it is. All right. So the first question was, can I share a calculated formula for the missed goal? Yeah. So I think that was one of the first couple visuals that I was working on. So let me just flip back there. Okay. Yeah. So I'm guessing this was for the missed goal amount in this text table. So what I did here is I just said, so the first thing I did, because this was the simplest part, was just what's the sales goal amount and subtract the sales amount off of that. So if this value was higher than that value, like in this case, it was 6,000. The problem was, like in this case, it would be negative 13,000 because this would be 46,000 minus 59,000. So I just said, hey, if you calculate the difference between these two things and it's less than 0, just give me a 0. There's no gap to the goal at that point. But if it is a positive value, then give me that. So actually, that's all that missed goal amount field was. So it seems more complicated than it is. Thankfully, I did a little prep yesterday, so I had a chance to think through it, because I think on the fly I might have fell on my face with that one if I hadn't. Yeah, great. So the next question was, how do you handle having different goals where some need to be greater than or equal to the goal and some need to be less than the goal? Yeah, so that's a good question. Let me think about if I can think of a scenario where I have that. So I guess one thing I would think about is that hopefully those aren't at the same time, meaning like if you had a situation where you're like, oh, for phones, we would want it to be above this threshold, but for chairs, we'd want it to be below this threshold. When you're starting to get into specifics like that, that can get a little bit difficult, because then what you have to do in Tableau is you have to use like a conditional statement, like an if then, and be like, if the category equals phones and the value is greater than this, then good. Otherwise, if it equals chairs and it's less than that, then bad. So you can do that, although that takes a bit of effort. Maybe what I would do, just thinking about that, is I might just come up with a field that just indicates like, oh, phones needs to be over the threshold, chairs doesn't. So in this case, because there's just 17 subcategories, yeah, I could just create a quick case statement that would say like phones, greater than, chairs less than, binders equal to. So that's one option if I understood that question correctly. If the question was more so just how do I handle flipping between like sometimes goals are, you want to be over a threshold and just generally sometimes you want to be under, it should work the same. So if my goal, let's say that this was more so like a value that you were trying to stay under, like, oh, a profitability, or a loss mount or something like that, you could just flip all the operators and it should work. I mean, more or less the same. Yeah. Um, yeah, so here's a good question. How do we use the previous year value or an average of the previous 3 years as a goal/reference line? So those are actually sort of two separate questions, actually, kind of two different ways you'd get there. So option one, like using last year's value, I hard coded this. Like, so for 2020 sales, I said if the year of the order date equals 2020. But if you just wanted to have like current year sales as a field, you could just say if year of order date equals year of today. Today is just going to pull the local date field off of the computer that you're working on. So if your data source is an Excel file on your desktop, it'll use that date. If it's an extract on a Tableau server and the server's in a different time zone, it will use that date. So just something to be aware of. But this would give me my current year sales. So then if I wanted it to be last year's, I would just say year of today -1. So that's how you could kind of have, either calculate this year or last year's values. Now, an average of the previous 3 years is a little bit more tricky. I think it would require a level of detail expression, but bear with me here. I think I did a blog post on this a while back. So as I'm putting together the resources that'll go along with this webinar recording, I'll get that blog post because I think that'll do a better job than I will on the fly right here. But if I wanted this to be like my last 3-year sales average, I think I would need to do something like this. So I would say if the year of the order date is how would I do this? I'd say greater than the year of today minus, what would I say, 4, I guess. And the year of my order date is less than the year of today, then sales. So this is only going to give me sales between, in this case, 4 years ago, 20. This should give me. Did I do this right? I might have gone too far back. 2021 -4, that'd be 2017. So this would give me, yeah. So this would, because it's greater than that. So this would give me 2018, 2019, and 2020. So then to make this super simple, what I could probably just do is just say, give me the sum of all these values divided by 3, because it's just 3 years. But depending on how I'm going to use this, I might need to use a fixed statement. So I might need to say like fixed at a subcategory level, give me all of this. So I'll probably leave it here just to not go too far down the dark hole of level of detail expressions. But this could work in sort of a simple situation. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got another question here. Yeah, so there was a question about some of these kind of calculations that I already have pre-calculated, and if there was a library, with some of that. So I would say yes and no. So I don't have like a proper, hey, just here's a Tableau data source. You open up, you right click, and you copy and you paste the calculation. So I don't have that exactly, but I'm just going to show you the Word document version of this because I'm not actually, I don't have the web link handy. But something that I do is every couple of weeks, I'm keeping a PDF on our website updated with our resources. So I think there's like a couple hundred blog posts and webinars now. And so specifically with these date calculations, like there's a whole section on dates that would talk about like how do you calculate week to date? How do you calculate month to date? How do you calculate business days? Things like that. So that's a great resource. I'll make sure that I put this in the follow up as well, because that's kind of the closest thing that we have to a library like that. But I like that idea though, just in general, of just having like a Superstore data set you could download with 50 pre-done calculations that you could utilize. So I'll think on that. Maybe that's something we could do in the future. Cool. So we got a couple more questions here, and then I think we'll probably end up wrapping it up from there. Yeah, so one of the questions was about the trick with the percentage labels on the highlight table. So I sort of showed two ways of doing that. The one that it's set on right now is just showing the labels when the value fell below 10%. So for instance, what I did for that is I just said, if profit ratio is less than 10%, then profit ratio, end. Because there's no else, the implied else is just else null. So by dropping that on label, it makes sure that anything above 10%, like consumer binders, didn't show up. The trick that I showed one step before that was, see if I can find, profit ratio. Okay, so if I just had profit ratio on labels instead, the other trick I showed is that in the label dialog, instead of showing all your labels all the time, you could just say, show the highlighted labels. So nothing shows up unless a selection is made. And that selection can be in the worksheet, or that could even be in a color legend, for instance. But those are a couple different ways of, limiting the labels that are showing up. And because you're here for kind of the bonus section, I'll show you one other trick as well, which I like to use. Let's get my Tableau public pulled up here. This one requires a little bit more calculations and a little bit more pre-planning than what I just showed you. But another thing that I like is you could actually create options for your user. So this is a chart showing the most common birthdays in the US. So I have it defaulted to just labeling the bottom 10, like the least common birthdays, but I just hard coded some values. So I was like, hey, you can see all of the birthdays if you want, but that's a lot of information. So if you just want to see like the top 10, then you could just hit that drop down and just see those labeled. So this is a parameter that's tied out to a calculation, so requires a bit more forethought than what I was just showing you, but you could actually even provide something like that for your users. Cool. So then I think what's going to be the last question I'm seeing is if you had a situation, and this might be a follow-up to something else, so I'm sorry if I am not tying the pieces out, but if we had a situation where with revenue where you wanted to compare actual to budget and see if it exceeded it or was below budget or something like that. That might have just been an example of earlier where I was talking about sometimes the goal is greater than or less than. So yeah, I might need to think on that one a little bit more because I'm not sure if I have like an example ready in my back pocket, but um, oh, okay, yeah, okay. I think it's coming together for me now. So this is almost like a P&L accounting type thing. So like, okay, for this situation, if we're talking about revenue, I want it to be above the budget, but if we're talking about expenses, I want it to be below the budget. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying, where I would say like, if my, category was revenue, then I would want to see, the sales amount, and this isn't actually going to make any sense. Just imagine this is dollar amount. Then, I would want to see the, dollar amount is greater than the goal amount. But if the category was expense, then ideally, the dollar amount would be less than or equal to the goal amount. So I know with sales specifically that doesn't make sense, but that's probably how you would handle it as a situation like this, where you're saying, okay, revenue, these rules should apply, expense, these kinds of rules should apply. So it just takes a little bit of extra calculating and customization there. All right, cool. Well, I don't know about you. I feel pretty talked out. So appreciate you being here, bringing some great questions and just joining. So yeah, we'll have this recording up. Appreciate it. Feel free to send anything else that you think of over email, and I'm happy to kind of send you resources and respond as I'm able to. So let's be on the line here for another 20 seconds, and then I'll let you run. So thank you again.